Things are changing in the workplace, and when that happens, we have to come to the expert here at HRU Tech. I'm with Tim, and we're talking about the vaccine. Of course, different companies are handling this different ways, but how do we go about it, and what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about this, it seems like for the last year and a half, and people keep going, can we talk about something else? And at the end of the day, when the government goes, hey, we're going to mandate a vaccine, all of a sudden everybody at work like freaks out. I was at SHRM annual conference, which is the largest HR conference in the world, like 8,000 SHRM people in person, by the way.
Wow.
And that was the biggest topic of conversation. Like, how, if you're going to mandate your employees to get this, we already know just politically half the population is like, wait a minute, I don't want this. And then the other half, now again, that's a little misnomer because you're age-wise, right? We know a bunch of kids who haven't gotten it. So there's probably more like 60 or 70% of the adult population is fine with it. But if I have one employee that doesn't want the vaccine, then that becomes a problem because the government's saying, hey, then they can't come to work. Now again, we know as well, all of this stuff is going to get caught up in lawsuits and issues. And when the final decision comes out, we're going to have to see a bunch of things, you know, that's actually going to change. So if I'm going to like actual mandate my employees to get vaccinated, there's a couple things we have to worry about. One is religiously, do they have an exemption? Or medically, do they have an exemption? And if they do, then we have to make those accommodations, which then we all have to test every week. And we hate the tests.
They're so painful. It's like we were talking about when, you know, they stick that up your nose, you're just sore. And to think about doing that every single week is kind of a pain, and then a use of a lot of resources, right?
Well, right now, like we got a little comfortable that the really good test, the PCR test that you put up your nose, sometimes we would get that back in 24 hours. But right now, nationally, that's taking 2 to 3 days. Well, if I'm an employer, I can't wait 2 or 3 days for the person to come back to work for 2 days because it's negative, and then we start the whole process over the next week. So then we know we would have to use rapid testing, which the government one has said, hey, we're not going to accept the rapid testing as a result. And then the other issue is we don't even have enough rapid tests to even do that. We don't have enough PCR tests to do that. So if we go and say all of a sudden tomorrow or next week Monday that we have an extra 100 million people having to test, the system totally falls apart. So the government can say they're going to do this, but the reality is logistically as employers, we couldn't do it right now if we had. The only thing we could do is to say, hey, you're mandated to get the vaccine, and if you don't get it, you're fired. And then we end up in lawsuits. So it doesn't really necessarily work perfectly yet.
I'm not really good at math, but 100 million people times one test a week, oh my goodness, that's a lot of resources. So what do we do in this situation?
I mean, I think part of it right now is just to stay calm. I think the initial reaction of the announcement, everyone kind of freaks out. What we know in the HR world, in the business world, is that things will evolve and change. I think the government has always been pretty good of understanding, saying, hey, we said this, but in practice, it's really going to be something else. And this is what this looks like. I think I think everyone's worried about public health. They're trying to get more people to get the vaccine so we don't have people dying. And so it's all done for the right purposes. But how we actually roll it out to organizations is just it's gonna take time. I don't think we'll actually see a real mandate come down until sometime in 2022 based on all the logistics that have to happen first.
The right reasons are there, but sometimes like figuring out how to navigate it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, and I think that's the frustration businesses feel, especially small business, is the government hasn't given a lot of recommendations or advisement on, hey, here's how you should be doing this. And here's, by the way, here's how we're gonna help you pay for it. Because if you're a company that doesn't make a lot of money, you have low margin, and all of a sudden now you have to add in all this testing and have to hire more workers because if a worker tests positive, they're out, all of the stuff that goes on with that. Small businesses look at this and go, wait a minute, we couldn't stay in business. And the government doesn't want that either.
No, that's true. All right, Tim, so help us out. If we're kind of having anxiety around this and you're an employee that's having anxiety, make sense of it and kind of wrap it up for us.
So the one thing I would say, if you're an employee having anxiety, no one is going to force you to get a shot. That's just not going to happen. The government won't do that. Your employer won't do that. But you might have to test, you know, and again, our hope is you'd have a rapid test, takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, something like that on a weekly basis, and it wouldn't be up your nose, it would just be spitting or whatever. So a little easier, and you can work through that. And if you're an employer also having stress about this, again, no one's going to force you to do this without more advisement that's going to come down the road. And again, probably more like 90 to 180 days from now than like, hey, this is going to happen tomorrow, you have to do something. We rarely see that kind of legislation happen very quickly.
Okay, thank you for the information and taking the anxiety down a little bit for us.
For sure.
All right, stick around. More of Studio 10 is coming up after the break.